After spending my stolen $80,000 on vacation, my son and his wife returned home looking happy, until they tried to put the key in the lock. The door wouldn't open. On the porch, a note was waiting for them, and when they read it, they screamed so loudly that. Subscribe to the channel and share your stories in the comments. And now let's get started. The key wouldn't go in. It was such a small sound, the scrape of metal against a lock, but it carried the weight of years. Kyle twisted the silver key with his impatient strength, rattling it as though the sheer force of his will could make the door surrender. It didn't. Amber shoved him aside with a flick of her manicured hand, her bracelets chiming against the brass handle as she tried herself. Nothing. The lock resisted her, cold and mute, as if the house itself had finally learned the word no. I was not there in body. I was 2 streets away, sitting in my car under the shade trees of Riverbend Park, but my spirit was standing on that porch. My spirit was watching the tantrum, the disbelief, the sudden panic. For years I had been the invisible locksmith of their lives, turning keys that weren't mine, loans signed, bills extended, overdrafts covered, rent paid in silence. And now for the first time I had locked the door and pocketed the key. Their luggage lay heavy on the porch, his suitcase black, scuffed, with a broken zipper that I had once offered to replace. Hers leopard print with a ridiculous pink ribbon tied to the handle, a traveling circus announcing itself in every airport. They had wheeled them back from their so-called dream vacation, posting filtered sunsets and umbrella cocktails while $80,000 bled out of my account like a patient I could no longer resuscitate. Amber bent down and noticed the envelope first. It was clipped to the porch railing with a blue clothespin, plain, waiting. Not hidden, not disguised. Visible, inevitable. She ripped it free and shoved it into Kyle's chest. His face changed as he unfolded it, his tan skin paling as though all the salt air of their Caribbean week had been scrubbed away in a second. His mouth fell open but no sound came out. He looked as though he had touched a live wire. Amber snatched it from him, her voice splitting the air. A scream, high, animal, humiliating in its desperation. H*T across Hillview Lane. Loud enough for neighbors to come running. The firefighter next door was the first. He jogged over in his yard clothes, scanning for smoke, for fire. But there was no flame. Only paper. On heavy cream stock, 3 lines in clear black print. House sealed. Access denied. Nor read. And beneath it, the lawyer's stamp, ink that could not be smudged by their frantic fingers. No threats. No pleas. No explanations. Just the cold geometry of fact. They pounded the door, fists slamming wood that had once welcomed them. Wood that had heard laughter, excuses, lies. Amber's voice rose in a desperate rhythm. Open. Open. This is our house. As if repetition could make it true. Kyle shook the handle so hard the brass rattled. Their bodies crashed against the locked frame. 2 children pounding at the gates of adulthood that had never once truly admitted them. But inside, silence. I sat with the river in front of me, watching the water move slow and patient. The current didn't hurry. It simply carried everything that fell into it. Leaves, branches, and people's carelessness. For years I had been that current for them, absorbing what they dropped, pulling their debris along with my own body until I was heavy, slow, almost drowned. Now, for the first time I wasn't carrying. I was watching. The irony was sharp. All the locks I had once opened for them. Credit accounts rescued at midnight. Overdue bills smoothed over with my own balance. Phone lines extended when theirs had been cut. I had been their master key, the one who opened every closed door. Today, finally, I closed my own. I remembered every key I had turned on their behalf. The first time Kyle called at 23, his voice low, ashamed. Mom, rent's late. They'll evict us. I paid without hesitation. The second time, Amber texted. Electric's overdue. Can't study in the dark, lol. I paid again. By the 10th time, there was no shame in their voices anymore. Only expectation, as if my money grew in a tree behind the house and my only duty was to harvest it for them. And now on that porch they stood locked out not just of the house, but of the illusion they had built, that I would always endlessly open the door. The neighbors watched. Curtains lifted. The old widow across the street peeked through her blinds. The firefighter shifted awkwardly, realizing this wasn't a fire he could put out with a hose. Kyle pulled out his phone and started dialing furiously. No answer. I had already silenced him. He tried again. then hurled the phone onto the porch boards where it bounced like a child's toy. Amber clutched the note to her chest, sobbing, mascara running in thick black trails down her cheeks, streaks like war paint on the face of someone who had already lost. I should have felt pity. I had always felt pity. That was the chain they had tied me with. But that morning, parked by the river, I felt only stillness. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My heartbeat slowed instead of raced. For the first time in years, the silence inside me was louder than their shouting. I thought of the vacations I had never taken because they needed help. The coats I had never bought, the repairs I had postponed, the trips to see old friends I had canceled because Kyle and Amber always had some new emergency. Their emergencies had become the architecture of my life. And now their emergency was that their key would not turn. It was fitting. A lock finally doing what I had never dared. Keeping them out. The words on the note were not poetic, not sentimental. They were printed in 12-point font, clear, practical like a line in a ledger. Strength doesn't always arrive as shouting. Sometimes it is typed, sealed and pinned with a clothespin. I didn't need to see more. I put the car in drive, the river receding in my rearview mirror. Behind me they kept pounding, kept calling, kept screaming that it was unfair. But fairness had been drained from me long ago. Today was not about fairness. Today was about finality. I drove slowly, deliberately, through Cedar Falls where whispers already spread faster than leaves in the wind. The butcher raised his eyebrows as I passed. At the cafe, the barista lifted a hand in quiet salute. They knew. Everyone knew. By the time Kyle and Amber realized the locks were more than brass, that they were decisions, signatures, law, Cedar Falls would have already chosen sides. And this time the town would not choose them. They thought I was their material. Amber with her camera always ready. Kyle with his lazy grin that turned every cruelty into just a joke. I was their stage, their endless source of content, the mother-turned punchline. And I played along for too long, laughing quietly so the room wouldn't notice that my smile had no weight. No warmth, only compliance. It started small. At Aunt Lynn's 60th birthday I had baked a pie. Not store-bought, not frozen, a real pie, the kind my own mother taught me to make. Crust folded by hand, apples peeled with care, cinnamon measured by instinct. I placed it on the table, proud in my quiet way. Amber, in her 25-year-old glow, lifted her phone, panned across the dessert table, then zoomed right onto my pie and announced loud enough for the whole family. "Nora, maybe try a recipe app next time. You're so old school." Her voice was sugar-coated but sharp. Laughter followed. Her followers, and there were plenty, would see the clip later. Hashtag mom from the past. I heard the clicking camera shutter. I heard Kyle's chuckle, the same laugh that used to melt my heart when he was 5 years old. Now it felt like a blade. No one defended me. They laughed because she laughed, because it was easier to join the performance than to confront it. I swallowed it as I always did. But humiliation is never isolated. It spreads. At the grocery store I pulled out coupons from my wallet, a habit that had kept me alive through years when money was tight. When Kyle was little and shoes wore out faster than I could replace them. Amber leaned close to the cashier, stage whispering but loud enough for everyone in line. "Nora's saving pennies again so we can buy concert tickets." The cashier glanced at me, pity flickering behind her forced smile. Amber laughed, Kyle laughed, strangers in line laughed because what else could they do? I folded the receipt, tucked my coupons back into my purse, and told myself it was nothing. Just their way. Just their humor. But each joke was a subtraction. Each quip erased a piece of the respect I had once believed was permanent. At church, during the fundraiser, Kyle was supposed to handle the donation reports. He arrived late, sheepish, hair damp with the smell of last night's whiskey. I had already covered his error, altered the figures to hide his mistake. When he finally showed up, he told his friends with a smirk, "Mom always bails me out." They laughed as if I were a character in his comedy routine, not the one who had saved him from embarrassment in front of the congregation. I was 58 then, a bookkeeper at Cascade Logistics. Every number I touched balanced. Every sheet of paper I handled had precision. My entire career was proof of order, reliability. But with Kyle and Amber, my competence became a joke. My sacrifices became memes. My devotion turned into their performance. There were dozens of little moments, all blending into one long humiliation reel. At a summer barbecue, Amber filmed me while I tried to light the grill. "Look at Nora trying to start fire like it's the 1800s, she giggled, uploading it instantly. When my washing machine broke and I washed a few shirts by hand in the sink, she took a photo. Mom's going Pioneer Corps. Kyle on his birthday, when I gave him a carefully chosen leather wallet, laughed and told his friends. Perfect. Now she can slide her money in here before I even ask. Each moment was small enough to be excused. Each could be brushed aside with "they didn't mean it." But together they formed a wall of mockery, and I was trapped behind it. It is hard to explain what it feels like when the people you love most slowly strip away your dignity, not with violence, but with laughter. Laughter is harder to defend against. Few protest, you are humorless. Few stay silent, you are complicit. I stayed silent. For years. I thought silence was strength. I thought patience was wisdom. But silence is a kind of consent. Tells them they can keep going. And they did. The moment that broke me wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. One Tuesday morning, I opened my brokerage account while sipping my coffee. I had saved and scraped for decades, putting away what little I could. That account was meant for one thing. A lakeside cottage, a dream I had carried quietly, privately, since I was a girl. I imagined mornings with mist over the water, evenings with books and silence. It wasn't extravagant. It was simply mine. But when I logged in that morning, the balance read 0. The $80,000 I had kept there was gone, siphoned off in 3 swift transactions. My coffee went cold as I scrolled through the records. The money had been routed through Kyle's old email account, the one I had once helped him set up for his taxes. The transfer note read, "Vacation urgent. Vacation urgent." Hours later, Amber posted champagne glasses clinking over turquoise waves. Caption, "Finally living." That was the day their jokes ended for me. That was the day I realized their laughter had always been camouflage for theft. I didn't cry. Crying felt like a luxury, and luxuries were something I had already given up for them. Instead, I took out a notebook and began to write. A list. 5 steps. Cold, practical, like an audit. I had balanced other people's accounts all my life. Now I would balance my own. And as I wrote, one truth crystallized. They had made me their punchline, but I would write the ending. The morning my savings vanished smelled of coffee. Not bitter, not burnt. Just ordinary, the kind of coffee that marks the beginning of another working day. It was supposed to be a calm Tuesday. The ledger from Cascade Logistics sat in my briefcase by the door, my thermos filled. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. But quietness is deceptive. Behind it, worlds collapse. I opened my laptop, logged into my brokerage account, the one place where my years of restraint had gathered in silence. I had never been reckless. No vacations abroad, no expensive jewelry, no impulsive purchases. I wore the same winter coat for 8 years. My vacations were afternoons by the library window with a book borrowed and returned on time. My indulgence was that account. $80,000 planned for one thing. A lakeside cottage where I could spend whatever years remained to me in peace. When the page loaded, I thought the numbers had failed to refresh. I hit reload. The balance didn't change. Zeros stared back at me, clean absolute. $80,000. Gone. The cursor blinked in the corner like a cruel metronome. My hands turned cold, yet I kept scrolling, searching for an error I could correct. A misplacement I could reconcile like one of my office reports. But the truth was in front of me. 3 transactions processed overnight, through an IP address not mine. The approvals had been routed to Kyle's old email, the one I had once set up for him when he was 20 and confused about filing taxes. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table with him, teaching him about 2-step verification, showing him how to set a recovery question. My voice had been gentle then. "Keep this safe, Kyle. It matters." Now that email, that forgotten lifeline I had built for him, had become the channel of my ruin. The transaction notes mocked me in digital ink. Vacation. Urgent. I froze. Not a car accident. Not a hospital bill. Not an emergency that might twist a mother's arm into forgiveness. Vacation. I dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Amber's phone rang twice, then silence. I texted, my words clipped. "Call me. Now." No reply. I refreshed my browser, hoping by some miracle the numbers would correct themselves. They didn't. Instead, my phone buzzed with a new post notification. Amber's story. A photo of champagne glasses lifted against turquoise waves, her hand visible with nails painted coral pink. Caption. Finally living. Living. With my money. Something inside me shifted. Not shattered, no. Shattering is loud, dramatic, final. This was quieter. A door closing, a bolt sliding into place. I felt the kind of stillness that comes when grief turns to calculation. I dressed carefully, not for work, but for battle. Dark slacks, pressed blouse, the good coat. I drove not to the office, but to Attorney Miles Kerr. His office smelled of leather and dust, the kind of place where words are turned into E*P****s. He listened without interruption, his eyes steady on the papers I had printed. Logins, transfer receipts, ****ts. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. Mrs. Reed, no power of attorney was signed? None. Shared accounts? Never. These were my credentials. My funds. They used my old saved logins. Autocomplete filled what I once typed for their bills. I was their bookkeeper at home as well as at work. He leaned back, fingers steepled. Hard, he said softly. But possible. Possible. The word hung in the air like a faint light through fog. I thanked him, left without tears. Tears were a currency I no longer funded. Outside, the air was sharp. I opened my notebook on the hood of my car, wrote 5 steps in careful handwriting. They weren't wishes. They were actions. Steps that would carve a straight path through the chaos. 1. Secure the house. 2. Sever financial lines. 3. Preserve proof. 4. Prepare for backlash. 5. Hold silence until action speaks. I closed the notebook, slid it into my bag. My reflection in the car window looked unfamiliar. A woman stripped of illusions but clothed in a new, colder clarity. That afternoon at work, I finished every task with machine precision. Numbers balanced. Reports filed. My colleagues joked in the break room, unaware that my life had cracked open just hours before. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that gives nothing away. But inside I kept replaying the image. Amber on the beach, champagne lifted. $80,000 dissolved into bubbles and salt air. Kyle's absence from my phone calls, his silence louder than confession. For years they had mocked me as old-fashioned. The mother who clipped coupons, the woman who saved pennies while they burned bills. They turned my thrift into a comedy sketch for their friends. But my thrift had built that account dollar by dollar. My pioneer ways had stacked themselves into a dream that would now never exist. What do you do when the cottage by the lake becomes 2 strangers' cocktails? When your decades of restraint become their Instagram story? You stop crying. You stop explaining. You write 5 steps in a notebook. And you start closing doors. They never stole quietly. Kyle and Amber liked their theft dressed as theater, staged under fluorescent lights and watched by strangers who had no choice but to become witnesses. Every humiliation had an audience. That was their power. And for years I let them direct the play. The first scene was at Columbia Bank on a Monday afternoon. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer toner. I had come to deposit my paycheck. The line was modest, 3 or 4 people, the hum of low conversations. Then Amber's voice cut through, bright and shrill, as if she were speaking on stage. Nora, transfer us more for rent, our flight's tomorrow. She stood near the teller window, one hand on her hip, her phone angled in selfie mode. People turned their heads. She wanted them to. Her voice carried that exaggerated indignation that works better with an audience. Can you believe she's stingy? We're her family. She's got money, and she's keeping it all to herself. The word stingy rang in my ears. Me, the woman who had spent 30 years clipping coupons, not for myself, but to cover other people's bills. Me, who had already drained $80,000 into their fantasies. Stingy. I felt eyes on me. The teller shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us as if expected to mediate. My face heated but my voice stayed even. No transfer. Not today. Amber groaned dramatically, rolling her eyes. Unbelievable. People, can you believe this? She swung her phone toward the line, catching strangers' faces on camera. No one spoke. Silence is complicity. I walked away, deposit slip folded neatly in my purse. But inside something coiled tighter. The second scene was Pinecone Cafe. A place that had always been safe for me. I liked its quiet mornings, the hiss of the espresso machine, the wood tables worn smooth by years of elbows and coffee rings. I was seated with my notebook tallying figures when Kyle arrived. He came with that easy smile he used when he needed something. "Mom, want a pastry?" His voice was sweet enough to draw looks from the other tables. He made it sound like generosity. But when he leaned down, his breath hot against my ear, the words changed. "Send me cash. We'll pay it back." I didn't look up from my notebook. "No." He straightened, smile never faltering, and announced to the room. "She never wants anything. My mom's so modest." Laughter from a nearby couple, shallow, uncertain. He winked at them as though we were in on the same joke. He walked out without buying me coffee. I stayed, scribbling not numbers but sentences. Record everything. Do not erase. Build the file. The third scene was the most brutal. The Saturday farmers market in Cedar Falls is a tradition. The kind of place where neighbors greet each other by name, where transactions are wrapped in warmth. I had gone to buy tomatoes, a loaf of bread, perhaps honey. Kyle and Amber appeared suddenly, as though they had rehearsed the entrance. Kyle held his smartwatch up to the reader, paying for a basket of fruit. "Put it on Mom's card," he said casually. The cashier scanned, the receipt spat out with my name at the top. Nora Reed. The cashier read it aloud, perhaps without thinking, but the sound cut through the market chatter like a bell. Heads turned. People stared at me, then at them. Amber clapped her hands in mock gratitude. "Thanks, Mom. Family discount." She laughed, tossing her hair, filming the scene. I smiled politely, the way one smiles at strangers who have intruded on your privacy. Then I turned and walked away without the groceries, without explanation. My feet carried me slowly across the cobblestones, but inside my pulse was iron. That night, I laid out every bank statement on my dining table. I took photographs one by one, capturing dates, amounts, signatures. I built 3 identical folders. One for my lawyer, one for the cybercrime division, and one for myself, a future self who might one day try to downplay the reality. I sealed them in envelopes, labeled each with thick black marker. It was almost ceremonial, the way a soldier might lay out "we *p** and s" before battle. Cold paper, stamped numbers, receipts that could not be mocked away. And in those documents I saw the truth. Their performance wasn't random. It was strategy. They used public spaces as shields. If I protested, I was stingy, hysterical, humorless. If I stayed quiet, they looked generous, playful, young. Either way I lost. But documents do not laugh. Photographs do not erase themselves. By the time I finished, the house was quiet, every window dark. I sat in the stillness, folder beside me, and realized I had something stronger than anger. I had proof. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without tears. Not because I had peace, but because I finally had a plan. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs, stamps, and files. The day I sealed the Hillview house began like any other. Dawn breaking pale over Cedar Falls, the faint smell of frost clinging to the lawns. But in my kitchen, the table wasn't set with breakfast. It was covered with documents, bank closures, service cancellations, drafted letters, a printed sheriff's notice, a locksmith's business card. I had built their lives in whispers, in quiet transfers, in invisible sacrifices no one ever applauded. Now I was dismantling it in the same way. Quietly, deliberately, leaving only silence in my wake. The first call was to Miles Kerr, my attorney. His voice was calm, his words exact. "Mrs. Reed, the filing is complete. The court has logged your notice of restricted access. From this moment forward, you are sole legal resident of Hillview. Any attempt to enter without permission constitutes trespass." The second call was to Sheriff Holt's office. A deputy came by, clipboard in hand. He was younger than Kyle, hair trimmed to regulation, his voice polite but wary. He read the paperwork, nodded, and logged the record into his tablet. "Done, ma'am. If they try to force entry, call us. We'll handle it." Then came the locksmith. A man named Armand, quiet, his toolbox clinking as he walked up the driveway. He knelt at the front door, unscrewed, refitted, replaced. The sound of the old cylinder dropping into his hand was a sound I will never forget. Like a shackle being removed, like a chain hitting the floor. New locks clicked into place. Brass gleamed. For the first time in years, the house answered to me alone. I walked through every room after he left, touching doorknobs as though testing the strength of my own resolve. Bedroom, basement, back door. Each lock turned with smooth finality. The house was no longer porous, no longer vulnerable. Then came the financial cuts. I sat at my desk with every statement spread before me. My fingers moved with the precision of decades in bookkeeping. Click. Cancel phone lines. Click. Remove them from the family plan. Click. Disconnect auto payments. Delete wallet links. Cancel streaming accounts they never once paid for but always used under my name. Every click was a severed artery. Every confirmation email felt like a wall built higher. At Cascade Logistics, I typed a memo into the system. Effective immediately. No personal discounts or family credits are to be issued under the Reed name without direct written authorization. Neutral words signed in black ink, uploaded to the system. My colleagues would never know the story behind them, but the record would stand. It was astonishing how mundane it all felt. Years of exploitation undone not with shouts or courtroom drama, but with 10-digit account numbers and passwords typed carefully into forms. By evening, I had a stack of certified letters ready for the post office. Copies of cancellations, receipts of changes, confirmations of new passwords. I filed them in a binder labeled Transition. I could almost hear Kyle's voice mocking me. Of course you kept receipts, Mom. You're obsessive. Yes, obsessive saved me. Obsessive built walls higher than their entitlement could climb. The final act was the letter on the porch. I printed it on heavy stock 12-point font, simple and cold. House sealed. Access denied. Nor read. No explanation. No emotion. No plea for understanding. Just fact, clipped to the railing with a blue clothespin. A mother's silence louder than any scream. It struck me then how ordinary it all looked. A house on Hillview Lane, quiet, with trimmed hedges and curtains drawn. Neighbors walked dogs. Children played with chalk on driveways. And yet, inside, a battlefield had been cleared. The debris of years swept into neat files and locked drawers. I did not slam the door behind me. I did not curse their names. Instead, I folded laundry, paid my own bills, brewed tea, and when I sat down in my chair by the window, the silence of the house felt different. Not empty, sovereign. They would return from their paradise soon, sunburnt and smiling, carrying trinkets bought with money drained from the dream I had never realized. They would drag their suitcases up the porch steps, laughing, and then they would find the locks unyielding, the note waiting. I imagined their faces, their disbelief, their rage. But I also imagined their silence, the moment when noise fails and they are forced to stare at the one truth they never considered. My power had never been in the money I gave. My power was in my choice to stop. And now the lines were cut. Airports make people believe in fresh starts. Faces glowing from sun and cocktails, duty-free bags swinging like trophies. When Kyle and Amber landed back in Cedar Falls, they still wore the costumes of winners. Tan skin, braided hair, vacation bracelets clinking on wrists. They rolled their suitcases out of the terminal as though life waited to applaud them. But life doesn't clap for thieves. By the time their plane touched down, Cedar Falls already knew. Small towns move faster than jet engines when gossip is fuel. The cashier at the farmer's market whispered it over baskets of peaches. The pastor had murmured to me after service, his voice lowered but his meaning sharp. Strength takes many forms, Nora. Even the firefighter neighbor who had once teased Kyle about always landing on his feet, pretended to mow his lawn twice that day, just to watch the Hillview porch from across the hedge. I wasn't there when the cab pulled up. I was across town, sitting at Redwood Cafe, stirring my coffee slowly, receipt tucked safe in my wallet. But in my mind I saw it perfectly. Amber stepping onto the porch in her wide white sun hat, phone already raised to capture the triumphant return. Kyle dragging the black suitcase, muttering about the broken zipper. And then the envelope clipped in place, patient as judgment. She snatched it down, expecting perhaps a welcome home card. He ripped it open. The word struck them like a slap. House sealed. Access denied. Nor read. They screamed, banged, rattled the new locks that did not yield. Neighbors watched behind curtains. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. But no one opened a door to help. For years they had lived as if generosity were endless, but generosity had grown tired. Kyle called my number. I saw it flash on my phone screen, vibrating on the cafe table. I let it ring. He called again, then Amber tried, then both at once, as if double pressure might break me. The phone buzzed, then stilled. Silence. They switched tactics. Kyle dialed Miles Kerr, my attorney. Busy. He called again. Miles was in court. Busy. Amber paced, gesturing wildly, her face red beneath her tan. Their show had lost its stage. At Redwood Cafe, Jake the barista brought my cup with quiet respect. Your usual, Ms. Reed? His voice carried no judgment, only recognition. Yes, I said. And keep the receipt. He slid it across the counter. I folded it carefully, another small stone in the wall I was building. Proof of my presence, proof of my calm. When you are hunted, even your receipts must become shields. Half an hour later, Amber burst into the cafe. The bell above the door clanged like an alarm. Her hat was gone, her hair wild, her cheeks streaked where makeup had melted under rage. She spotted me at my corner table and stormed across the room, her voice already raised. You ruined our lives. Her shriek made heads turn. Conversations stilled. The espresso machine hissed in the pause. Jake froze behind the counter. I set my cup down deliberately, lifted my eyes to hers and spoke softly, so softly she had to lean closer to hear. Return the stolen $80,000. Then we'll talk. The cafe was silent enough to hear her breath hitch. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, words deserted her. The noise she relied on, the drama that had always shielded her, failed. She spun on her heel and stormed out, door slamming behind her, sunlight flashing off the glass. Jake slid another receipt across to me, printed with the exact time and date. His hands were steady. Mine were steady too. Thank you, I said. Anytime, Ms. Reed, he replied. People here, they see more than they say. That evening I drove past Hillview. The porch light was on, though no one lived there now. Kyle sat on the steps, his face in his hands. Amber paced like a caged thing, gesturing at her phone as if it might conjure salvation. The envelope lay torn in pieces by the railing. Their suitcases remained unopened, mute symbols of a journey that had ended the moment the key failed to turn. I didn't stop. I drove past, window down, the cool Cedar Falls air filling my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt the town's eyes not as pity but as recognition. They weren't looking at me as a fool anymore. They were watching a woman who had closed her doors. Later, when I returned to my cabin, I wrote the day's events in my notebook. Not just the facts, those were already in files and receipts, but the feeling. How silence can be stronger than screams. How a mother can unmake children not with violence but with absence. It struck me that justice doesn't always come from courts or police. Sometimes it comes from neighbors who choose not to help, from baristas who print receipts, from whispers that travel faster than lies. Kyle and Amber had built their world on applause. But applause fades. And when it fades, you are left with only the echo of your own voice. That night, I sat on my porch at Silver Pine Lake. The water moved quietly, reflecting the moon. In my pocket, the cafe receipt pressed against my thigh like proof that calm can be louder than chaos. I sipped my tea and whispered to myself, this is the beginning. They think this is ruin, but for me it is only the start. When brute force failed them, when fists against the Hillview door and screaming in cafes won them nothing, they shifted to something more poisonous. Pity. Started online. The Cedar Falls Facebook group, normally filled with yard sales and bake sales, suddenly lit up with a post from Amber. A photo of her and Kyle on the porch of Hillview, suitcases beside them, her face twisted in exaggerated misery. Caption: poor young couple locked out by unstable mother. We've been abused, manipulated, gaslit. All we wanted was a home. Please pray for us. Within minutes, comments appeared. Some sympathetic strangers. That's awful. Parents should support their kids. But many from Cedar Falls residents who knew me, who had watched me for decades, simply typed, check the facts. We know Nora. The tide wasn't in their favor. The next morning, a text arrived from Kyle. I read it twice, the words bold, manipulative, crafted to hook the heart. Amber's pregnancy is at risk. Doctor says no stress. Please mom, don't do this now. You can't be heartless. Pregnancy. They had reached for the oldest P*n in the arsenal of manipulation. The unborn child as shield as leverage. I dialed Dr. Rose Clinic, where half of Cedar Falls goes for obstetric care. This is Nora Reed. I'd like to pay directly for Amber's appointments, if there is a medical order on file. High-risk pregnancy, perhaps? The secretary's voice was brisk. Patient not in our records, ma'am. Not a patient. Not a pregnancy. Just another lie. I hung up and wrote the call time in my notebook, underlined twice. Evidence of fabrication. They wanted me to tremble at the idea of an endangered grandchild. Instead, I had proof of their fraud. But lies rarely arrive alone. That afternoon, Officer Garcia called. His tone was cautious, almost apologetic. Mrs. Reed, we received an anonymous complaint about elder abuse. Someone reported you as vulnerable, possibly being coerced, not fit to live alone. I laughed, not out of humor but clarity. Elder abuse against myself? Yes, ma'am. Protocol requires I check. I rattled off case numbers, filing dates, the sheriff's log report from when the locks were changed, the certified letters. Garcia chuckled softly. I thought so. Just needed to confirm. They're flinging mud. Doesn't stick when there's paper. Paper. My fortress. But still they tried. Amber staged a fainting spell at Pinecone Cafe 2 days later, collapsing in the middle of the floor. Customers rushed. Chairs scraping, voices panicked. Jake called 911. When paramedics arrived, she refused transport, clutching her stomach and sobbing. My baby, the stress is too much. She's *ling us. I stood at the counter, receipt in hand, my voice calm. Paramedics, ask for her medical file. Dear. Rose Clinic has confirmed she is not under their care. Amber froze. Her sobs faltered. The cafe went silent. One of the medics glanced at her, then at me, then back at her. He murmured to his partner, and they packed their bags. No transport. No record. Just another lie deflated in public. Kyle exploded outside, slamming his hand against the cafe's brick wall, shouting, You're cruel, Mom. Heartless. Do you want your grandchild dead? I faced him squarely. Produce a medical record, Kyle. One document. Otherwise, stop wasting Cedar Falls' time. People on the sidewalk stared. Some shook their heads. One woman whispered to another, loud enough for me to hear. She raised him. Imagine how she feels. Shame doesn't cling well to liars. It slides off them, leaving them always reaching for a new costume. So the next mask they chose was illness. Kyle posted at midnight. Mom has untreated dementia. She doesn't know what she's doing. Pray for us as we try to protect her. The comments filled with local names this time. People who had seen me balancing ledgers, filing taxes, writing precise notes on receipts. Dementia? Nora runs half the town's accounts. If she's sick, we're all in trouble. The smear campaign collapsed under the weight of memory, the town's memory of who I had been for decades. Still, they escalated. They tried to *P***Ni's authority. A week later, an official envelope arrived from social services. Inside, a form. Wellness check. Someone had reported erratic behavior, paranoia, confusion. The investigator, a young woman with 2 bright eyes, knocked on my door. Mrs. Reed, may I come in? You may, but only with my attorney present. She hesitated. This isn't a legal interrogation. Just a check. I smiled thinly. Then you won't mind waiting until counsel arrives. She sat stiffly on my couch until Miles Kerr walked in, briefcase in hand. His voice was clipped. Miss, unless you have a court order, my client is under no obligation to entertain these baseless complaints. What family submitted them? The woman shuffled her papers. Her son and daughter-in-law. They say she's isolating, cutting off contact, refusing care. Miles opened my binder. And here are receipts of accounts secured, locks changed with sheriff's supervision, cybercrime reports filed, bank confirmations logged. Does that look like incompetence to you? Her eyes flicked between the documents and my steady face. At last she closed her folder. I see no cause for further investigation. When she left, Miles turned to me. They're cornered, Nora. Lies are all they have left. And it was true. Their desperation was showing. Each new performance contradicted the last. Pregnant one day, fainting the next. Suddenly the caretakers of a mother they had mocked for years. Their storylines tangled, falling apart under the weight of their own contradictions. But still, I documented everything. Every *T, every voicemail, every rumor traced back to its source. I wasn't just defending myself. I was building a case so airtight that when the time came, their collapse would be public and undeniable. One evening, sitting by the water at Silver Pine Lake, I thought about the absurdity of it all. How they had turned motherhood into a battlefield. How they wielded lies like *P***ns, never realizing that lies decay when exposed to daylight. The water was calm, the breeze carrying the smell of pine. My notebook lay open on my lap. I wrote one sentence in the center of the page, underlined twice. They mistake silence for weakness. But silence is preparation. And with that I closed the book. Their mud no longer stained me. It only dirted their hands. When lies collapse, laws begin. I had lived most of my life outside the language of courtrooms and filings. My power had always been private. Balancing ledgers, keeping houses running, patching holes in other people's mistakes. But after they dragged me through rumor, false reports, fake pregnancies, and staged fainting spells, I understood one truth. They had *P***nice drama. I would *P***nice paper. The first line was the restraining order. Attorney Kerr drafted it with calm precision. He did not waste words. The document itself was cold, almost surgical. Kyle Reed and Amber Ellis are hereby ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from Nora Reed, her residence, and her place of employment. Signed by a judge, stamped with the county seal, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who knocked firmly on their temporary rental's door. Neighbors told me later how Amber shrieked when she read it. Kyle tried to argue, but the deputy only tapped the paper and said, "Violation means arrest." The law doesn't argue back. The second line was cybercrime. For weeks I had kept copies of every transfer, every login attempt traced back to their devices. Kerr filed it with the state cyber unit. A detective came by my house with a laptop, polite but firm. "Mrs. Reed, these are unauthorized access cases. You did not grant them permission, correct?" "Never," I said. "No power of attorney, no shared account. They used logins I once saved while paying bills for them." He nodded. "Then this qualifies as digital theft. It won't be quick, but the investigation has *N. Quick or not, the seed was planted. No hashtag could erase an investigation logged in official files. The third line was bank records. Columbia Bank, where Amber had once humiliated me with her stingy performance, now became my ally. I requested full login logs. The clerk printed them. Dates, IP addresses, digital fingerprints of every theft. He handed me the stack with careful hands. "Keep these safe, Ms. Reed. They don't vanish." The fourth line was insurance and medical records. For years, I had left them listed as emergency contacts. The residue of maternal habit. I scrubbed it all. Hospitals. Insurer. Pharmacy. Even the library account. Line by line, their names disappeared. No more late-night calls authorizing treatment. No more borrowed privileges disguised as family duty. It took days, but by the end the paperwork was complete. My life, stripped of their names, looked cleaner than it had in decades. And in Cedar Falls, the silence began to hum. For me it was peace. No knocks at my door. No midnight calls demanding money. No accidental charges on my accounts. For them it was a void they couldn't fill. At Pinecone Cafe, the manager leaned across the counter one morning, lowering her voice. "Ms. Reed, folks say Carlos Coffee Club dues. He tried to use your name last week." I stirred my tea. "I'm not his guarantor." She smiled softly. "We told him so." At the post office, a clerk raised his eyebrows when I picked up my certified mail. "Your son's been in here asking if you left a forwarding address. We told him law says we can't share." His voice carried a faint satisfaction. Even at Cascade Logistics, where work had always been my refuge, whispers reached me. A colleague stopped me in the hallway. "I heard your son tried to use your name for discounted shipping. You stopped it, right?" I nodded. "Paper trails matter." He squeezed my arm. "Good for you, Nora." It was strange how my refusal, something that had once made me feel guilty, selfish, now earned quiet nods of respect. In a town where everyone knew everyone, my silence became my shield, and their noise became their downfall. But for Kyle and Amber, the quiet was suffocating. The restraining order barred them from approaching. The bank froze their access. Their phones, once linked to my plan, had been shut off. Social services closed their complaint with no findings. They lived in a kind of deafening void. And voids make liars scream louder. They posted again online, claiming abandonment, cruelty, elder neglect. But the town no longer believed them. Too many had seen Amber's staged fainting, Kyle's outbursts, their wild contradictions. Too many had read the sheriff's notice or whispered about the cybercrime filing. One evening I walked through Cedar Falls Main Street. The sun was lowering, painting the shop windows gold. A couple of neighbors stopped me, their voices low. "Stay strong, Nora. People see the truth." Their support wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Loud belonged to Kyle and Amber. I had claimed quiet. And in quiet I was untouchable. The hardest part wasn't their lies. It wasn't even their rage. It was the clarity that came with every form filed, every record sealed. For decades I had confused motherhood with guardianship. I thought being a mother meant being a shield, a bank, a buffer between them and consequence. But the law had no such illusions. The law said, they are adults. They chose. They pay. And for the first time I agreed. That night, I sat at my desk and opened the binder labeled Transition. Inside were copies of everything: the restraining order, the cybercrime case number, the bank logs, the certified letters. Page after page of proof that silence is stronger when it's written down. I poured myself tea, turned to the last page, and wrote in neat ink. Motherhood ends when protection becomes destruction. Today it ended. The house was quiet. The lock secure. The phone blessedly still. For the first time in years, the silence was not a wound. It was a boundary. In Cedar Falls, news doesn't travel. Seeps. Like water into wood, like smoke under a door. First invisible. Then suddenly everything smells of it. By the time Kyle and Amber realized, their names were already swollen with rot. It began in small places. At the electronics shop, a clerk muttered to a customer in line. Didn't she try to return a speaker for cash? No receipt. Said her mother-in-law bought it. We checked. Nora's name wasn't even on the record. The story grew, spreading to the diner, to the salon. By Friday, people said Amber was known for cash returns that never balanced. Then Kyle's co-working space found the missing monitor. He had claimed it was on loan, but when the manager opened his trunk one morning, there it was, cords tangled, labels scratched. The discovery wasn't whispered. It was written in an email to the entire co-working group. Borrowing without permission is theft. Mr. Reed's membership is suspended pending repayment. Even his so-called investor chat, once filled with young men bragging about crypto gains, cooled to ice. Screensh *TS leaked. Hotel transfers paid from accounts linked to my stolen savings. Investors backed away. Kyle stopped posting motivational quotes. His silence there was as loud as Amber's shrieks in the cafe. At first, I thought the backlash would sting them into retreat. But parasites don't retreat, they dig deeper. One Saturday night I heard it. The faint crack of a window latch at Hillview. My new alarm system howled. A shriek louder than Amber had ever managed. Patrol cars arrived in minutes, sirens slicing through the dark. Neighbors spilled onto porches in their robes, watching the spectacle. Kyle and Amber stood in the yard, pale, defensive, faces lit red and blue by flashing lights. The deputy's body cam recorded everything. Their excuses, their protests, their rage. We live here. Amber shouted. This is our house. But the deputy pointed to the paperwork logged weeks earlier. No. On record. Attempted illegal entry. The words landed like a hammer. In Cedar Falls, on record is death. Gossip is powerful, but official records are permanent. I didn't hide. I stood at my own gate, rope tied, arms folded. Is your body cam running? I asked the deputy. Yes, ma'am. Good. Let them try to call me hysterical now. Cameras don't lie. Kyle glared at me, jaw tight. Amber sobbed into her hands. The neighbors didn't comfort them. Some turned away. Others whispered openly. The curtain of sympathy had been ripped away. The next morning at church, people didn't avoid me as they once had when Amber mocked my pies. They shook my hand firmly. The pastor placed a palm on my shoulder and murmured, "God grants justice in many forms." At Cascade Logistics, co-workers who had once pitied my endless rescues now came up quietly, nodding with respect. One even pressed a small card into my hand. "If you need help with testimony, I've seen what they've done to you for years." And in the cafe, Jake handed me my cup with a grin. "Ms. Reed, did you hear? Your son tried to buy coffee on your old account. We told him not a chance." I smiled. "Keep the receipt, Jake." For Kyle and Amber, the world was shrinking. Their faces drew stares in the market. Whispers followed them down Main Street. Not whispers of envy anymore, whispers of disgust. They tried to push back. They posted online again. "Mom locked us out, spread lies, ruined our lives." But *TS of their own transfers circulated faster. Photos of Amber fainting at Pinecone reappeared, captioned Oscar-worthy. Even the faint-hearted saw through it now. And yet, their arrogance had not died. The night of the break-in, when patrol hauled them from the yard, Kyle had spat. "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll die alone." Alone. The word used to pierce me. It used to make me bend, to write checks, to forgive, to buy love I never truly received. But now the word didn't wound. It liberated. Because alone is only pain when you are surrounded by people who feed on you. Alone after parasites are gone is quiet. Alone is mine. I wrote it in my notebook that night. Better alone with dignity than crowded with leeches. The backlash didn't stop at whispers. It hardened into actions. At the town library, Amber tried to check out books using my name still tied to her account. The librarian, Mrs. Whitaker, shook her head. "You're not Nora Reed. Access removed." She told me later, eyes twinkling. I stamped the card myself. It felt good. At the hardware store, Kyle attempted to buy tools on credit, muttering something about family discount. Mr. Summer refused. "Your mother already told us. No more." Customers in line clapped him on the shoulder, some laughing, some shaking heads. Kyle stormed out, but his fury looked pathetic now, not powerful. Step by step, space by space, Cedar Falls closed its doors to them. And I did not chase. I did not gloat. I let the silence spread. Let the receipts pile. Let the records speak. The woman they once called funny, stingy, old-fashioned had become unassailable. Not because I shouted louder, but because I had stopped playing. Social backlash isn't just gossip. It's the slow turning of a town's gaze, until you are left naked in the square. Your lies unraveling in the daylight. And I watched, steady, silent, sovereign. The text came on a Tuesday late evening, when the lake outside my window was silvered with moonlight. "Mom, please, meet me. No Amber. Just us. Family." For a moment I stared at the screen, the word family glowing like an accusation. They had used that word as a we**p* and so many times. Family meant obligation, debt, submission. But something about the phrasing made me pause. Not because I trusted him, but because sometimes silence must break, not for their sake but for closure. I chose the library. Neutral ground. The reading room where voices never rise above a whisper. Where even lies sound thinner. If he wanted performance, he would find no audience there. When Kyle arrived, he looked smaller. His tan had faded. His hair was unwashed. His shoulders hunched beneath a jacket that didn't quite fit. He carried no suitcase, no props, just himself. For the first time in months, he looked like my son, but a hollow version stripped of swagger, weighed down by debts he could no longer pawn onto me. "Mom," he began, soft, tentative. His voice cracked like it had when he was 13. "Caught sneaking beer from the fridge. We overreacted. But you understand, don't you? Things got out of hand. We can fix this." Fix. The word slid across the table like oil. I reached into my bag and placed a folder between us. Inside. Transfer logs, login records, *TS of their vacation posts stamped with the same dates money drained from my account. Evidence layered so tightly even lies would suffocate. "Two conditions," I said. My voice was steady, not raised, but in that quiet room it sounded sharper than any shout. One, a public confession. A letter to the Cedar Falls Herald signed with numbers. The word stole must appear. Not borrowed. Not mistake. Stole. 2. Repayment. Through escrow. Minimum $1,000 per month until the debt is complete. He blinked, swallowing hard. And the house. I slid another paper across. It's gone to the city. Hillview House will be converted into a craft center for teens. Carpentry, sewing, ceramics. They'll make things with their hands instead of excuses. His face paled. You're giving it away? I nodded. I'm giving it to kids who still have time to learn that life demands work. He leaned back, eyes wide, breath shaky. For a moment I saw the boy he once was, the boy who used to sit at the kitchen table drawing superheroes, telling me one day he'd build something great. The boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder after long days at school. That boy had disappeared years ago, replaced by this man who thought manipulation was currency. Mom, he whispered, voice breaking. We're not bad people. We just got desperate. I looked at him and felt a strange mix of grief and clarity. Kyle, desperation is when you can't eat. When you can't heat your house in winter. You stole $80,000 for cocktails and hotel suites. That's not desperation. That's greed. He buried his face in his hands. Amber said. Don't, I cut in. Don't hand me Amber as a scapegoat. You signed the transfers. You drank the champagne. You mocked me in public. Own it. Silence filled the reading room. Dust motes swam in the thin shaft of light from the lamp. I could hear the faint rustle of pages from another corner. Someone reading, unaware of the trial happening at the wooden table nearby. Finally he lifted his head. His eyes were red. Not from tears but from the weight of defeat. You really won't help us anymore, will you? No, I said simply. Not with money. Not with lies. If you want a life, you build it. If you want respect, you earn it. If you want forgiveness, you confess it. He looked at the folder again. His hand twitched as if to reach for it, then dropped back to his lap. He understood bargaining was over. The terms weren't flexible. The woman who once gave endlessly had turned finite. I'll think about it, he murmured. No, I replied. You'll decide. And soon. Because every day you delay, the town whispers louder. Cedar Falls remembers. His jaw clenched. He stood slowly, shoulders sagging. For a moment he hovered, as if he might hug me, as if the old bond might flicker alive. But my eyes stopped him. He turned and walked out, footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. I sat there, alone at the wooden table, folder in front of me. The silence was immense but not heavy. For the first time in our history, I had spoken without apology. When I left the library, the autumn air was sharp against my cheeks. The street lamps glowed in the dusk. I thought of Hillview House, soon to echo with the sound of saws and sewing machines, clay against wheels. A home transformed into a workshop. A monument not to loss but to renewal. On my walk back to the car, I remembered something from years ago. Kyle at 6, tugging at my sleeve, whispering after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball. Mom, fix it, please. I had fixed it then. Paid, apologized, smoothed the mess. But standing under the street lamps now, I realized. Some windows you fix. Others you let stay broken, so the one who shattered them sees the cold air come in. And this time I would not fix it for him. Sunday mornings in Cedar Falls are usually soft things. Hymn bells from the church, children on bikes, the faint smell of coffee drifting from Redwood Cafe. But that Sunday, City Hall carried a different kind of weight. The town had gathered for the Autumn Project Fair. Booths lined with quilts, woodwork, preserves, school children's posters. People milled, laughed, exchanged recipes. The hum of small-town life. But in the center the microphone stood. Waiting. I had chosen this day deliberately. Not because I wanted spectacle for myself. I had already stepped away from needing anyone's applause. But because confession means nothing in private. A lie must die where it once lived, in public. Kyle stood near the stage, paper trembling in his hands. He looked nothing like the boy who once swaggered into parties with Amber on his arm. His hair hung limp. His eyes darted like a cornered animal. His shoulders slumped under the weight of words he had never before been forced to speak. I sat in the second row, my coat buttoned to the throat, notebook closed in my lap. I did not smile. I did not soften. My gaze was steady, surgical. The mayor adjusted the microphone, then nodded to him. Mr. Reed, you have something to say. Kyle stepped forward. His voice cracked on the first syllable. He coughed, tried again. We, Amber and I. He paused, paper shaking. The crowd rustled, people shifting, whispering. He closed his eyes, drew a long breath, then forced the words out. We took $80,000 from Nora Reed. We lied. We humiliated her. We manipulated her. The house on Hillview was never ours. We are not victims. Silence fell heavy. You could hear the faint whir of the ceiling fans, the cough of an old man in the back row. The crowd didn't gasp, they froze. In Cedar Falls, words like that don't just vanish. They settle into memory like stones dropped in a riverbed. Kyle lowered the paper. His eyes flickered toward me, desperate, searching for some trace of relief, some maternal softness that might save him. I gave him nothing. My face remained carved from stone. After a long pause, a few hands clapped, hesitant, then stronger, then more. Applause not for him but for truth finally nailed to the wall. Amber did not appear. Word traveled quickly that she had packed her car that morning, white hat tossed on the back seat, driving west with no destination but the coast. She left Kyle alone to carry the burden of our family's rot. The mayor took the microphone again, his voice firm. On behalf of Cedar Falls, we accept this confession. And today I sign the deed. Hillview House is transferred to the city for the new House of Crafts. May it serve our youth better than it served its last tenants. A cheer rose, not raucous but solid. Relief, pride, recognition. The applause that once followed Kyle and Amber's filtered photos now belonged to the children who would one day carve wood and stitch fabric in the rooms of my old house. Afterward, I walked to Hillview one last time. The porch still smelled of sun on pine. I placed my hand on the railing where I had once clipped the envelope that ended their game. My fingers traced the grain of the wood, remembering the years, the birthdays, the late-night rescues, the mornings when I believed sacrifice would one day bloom into gratitude. Now it would not be a home but a workshop. The kitchen where Amber had once mocked my pies would hold sewing tables. The living room where Kyle had laughed at my stinginess would echo with saws and laughter. Transformation is the truest revenge. Kyle approached as I stood there. His face was pale, his voice low. Mom, I did what you asked. You confessed, I said flatly. Good. Confession is step 1. Repayment is step 2. Escrow account opens tomorrow. $1,000 a month. Non-negotiable. He winced. That'll take years. Yes, I replied. Years you should spend learning what work feels like. He stared at me, eyes glistening. Do you hate me? I shook my head slowly. Hate wastes energy. I don't hate you, Kyle. I just don't carry you anymore. His lips trembled. He wanted to argue, to plead, to collapse into my arms like he had as a boy. But my arms remained at my sides. The gulf between us was unbridgeable now, carved by years of entitlement and finalized in that confession. He turned away, shoulders bent, walking down the path like a man twice his age. I remained on the porch, my hand on the wood, my mind quiet. Sometimes to save memory you must change ownership. Sometimes the only way to honor the years you gave is to place them in different hands. When I finally stepped away, the porch light caught on my face. I felt no triumph, no glee. Just release. The house was no longer mine. The debt was no longer hidden. The lies were no longer alive. Exit. Clean. Final. 3 months after the confession, Cedar Falls had moved on. The gossip cooled, the whispers faded, new scandals rose. A zoning dispute, a school board argument, a neighbor's divorce. Life never stays on one story for long. But for me, the silence was not distraction. It was salvation. Hillview House no longer belonged to me. Its windows glowed in the evenings with new light, the laughter of teenagers learning how to cut wood, the hum of sewing machines, the steady rhythm of clay wheels. I drove past once, deliberately slow. The porch railing gleamed freshly painted. A banner hung across the gate. Hillview House of Crafts. I didn't stop. I didn't walk up. I let the sight wash through me like the sound of a door closing for good. I lived now in a cabin by Silver Pine Lake. 2 rooms, 1 stove, a strip of tomatoes growing in raised beds. No grandeur but no debt either. Each morning I brewed tea, carried it to the porch, and watched the water carry mist across its surface. It was not the lakeside cottage I had once imagined, No polished dream, no picture in a brochure. But it was mine. Fully mine. Paid with the money left untouched by thieves. Paid with the quiet that had once felt like loneliness but now felt like armor. Inside, my desk was stripped clean except for one binder labeled transition. I opened it once a week, not because I doubted, but because scars must be inspected. The restraining order still held. The cybercrime case moved forward slowly. The detective updating me with clipped emails. Investigation ongoing. Records preserved. The escrow account showed Kyle's first 3 payments, $1,000 each, arriving on time like clockwork. No emojis. No excuses. Just transactions. Cold, impersonal, almost merciful in their emptiness. Amber vanished. Word reached me that she had drifted west, chasing work on the coast. Her social media now filled with sunsets that looked suspiciously borrowed from stock images. No pregnancy. No fainting spells. No public declarations. Just silence. Parasites don't die, they relocate. But she was gone from Cedar Falls, and that was enough. Kyle, though, remained tethered by law. One Saturday, he sent a message that was almost unrecognizable from the boy who had once demanded, "Mom, I'm in counseling. Escrow is current. Can we do Saturday coffee? No money talk. Just to earn your trust." I read it 3 times. My pulse didn't quicken. My heart didn't ache. I set the phone down, walked to the window, looked at the still lake. Trust. A word too expensive for me to buy anymore. But the next morning I replied, "Pinecone porch. 9 m. 2 mugs. Quiet." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was an experiment in silence. That Saturday he came. He looked older, shoulders hunched, eyes shadowed. He didn't bring Amber, didn't bring excuses. Just himself. We sat on the porch of Pinecone Cafe, steam rising from our mugs. We didn't speak for 20 minutes. The silence was heavy at first, then lighter, then finally normal. Not mother and son, not benefactor and beggar. Just 2 people sharing air. It wasn't healing. Healing implies return. There would be no return. It was coexistence. And coexistence after everything was enough. Back at the cabin, the quiet grew richer each day. I tended my tomatoes, counted my steps by the water, read books without glancing at my phone in dread of a new emergency. I allowed myself small indulgences, a new coat, a box of imported tea, a fresh notebook with uncreased pages. Money spent on me. Me who had been last in line for decades. One evening as the sun sank red over the lake, I brewed tea and poured it into 2 mugs. One for myself. One left empty on the table. A ritual. Not for Kyle, not for Amber, not even for Robert, my late husband. The empty mug was for the years I had wasted. For the illusions I had fed until they grew fangs. For the woman I used to be, the one who thought love could be purchased with rent money and groceries. I lifted my own mug, tasted the bitter heat, and whispered, "Never again." Because scars do not vanish. They sit on the skin, reminders written in flesh. But scars are also proof you were wounded, yes. But you survived. Sometimes people ask me if I feel lonely in that cabin. I tell them no. Loneliness is the noise of absence. Quiet is the presence of yourself. And at last I have myself. Cedar Falls stopped whispering my name. But when I walked through town, people nodded respectfully. No one laughed at my pies. No one mocked my coupons. I had become something different in their eyes. Not a victim, not a fool, but a woman who had turned silence into steel. One night, I sat on the porch with the ledger of my life open in my lap. I began to write. $80,000 stolen. One house given away. One son bound by escrow. One daughter-in-law vanished. One woman still standing. I closed the book. The lake was dark, the stars sharp above the trees. Quiet wrapped itself around me. Not empty but full. And I thought, this is what living feels like. No hashtags. No filters. No debts. No foreign keys in my lock. Just 2 mugs on the table, one warm in my hands, one left empty for what I buried. And that emptiness was finally mine.